Uh, Talking about a change of emphasis, I think socialism has often been portrayed, at least, to be in conflict with business.
Yeah.
But you quite clearly make a distinction between small enterprises, small and medium enterprises, and transnational ones.
Yeah. Well, in my life, I've been an MP, but I wasn't always an MP. I began life as a milk boy at 11 years of age, running with a horse and cart. And I worked from 11 until I was 64. I've been a fireman, I've been in the railway, I've been in the Royal Navy. I've also worked in the private sector. I've worked abroad, I've worked in the Far East, in Malaysia and in the Philippines on World Bank stuff. And the last 14 years of my life, I was Assistant Secretary General at the Arab British Chamber of Commerce. And my job was the promotion of trade and advising Arab governments in the development of their economies. Incidentally, I worked with Jim Pryor, who had been in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet. He was the chairman. And we got on great. He's Tory, I'm socialist, but we got on great as we went through the Middle East and learned a great deal about how economies operate and all the rest of it. So I've been in the private sector and understand the private sector. There are two kinds of capital. There's big capital, the big Amazons and the giants and all the rest of it. Then there's what I call community capital. That's the small, medium-sized companies around Scotland at the present time. It might be the lassie when on a Saturday morning I go with my grandson for a coffee and a bacon roll to talk over how he's done at university in the past week. She's a small, medium-sized enterprise. It might be a taxi driver. It might be a bed and breakfast person. It might be a hairdresser or a dry cleaners. Or it might be somebody who's got a small manufacturing company or a small transport company. They're all part of what was called the SME, the small, medium-sized enterprise sector. There's almost 340,000 of those in Scotland. They are ill-served. Today in Inverness, I went to visit one of the people involved there, who tells me the same tale as I find all over Scotland in that section of industry. The big banks don't want to know them. If you need 20,000, they're not in the least bit interested in you, because there's no bonus in 20,000. I tell the lassie in the cafe, ask for 20 million. See, because you'll get an interview. They might not give you 20 million, you'll get an interview because there's bonus in the interview. And these big banks don't serve that small, medium-sized enterprise, and they're community capital, they're part of the community. So I've argued that two things we need to assist them. One is a ministry for the small and medium-sized enterprises in the cabinet on its own, so that they have a voice when policy is being made. But more important, set up an SME bank just for them alone. Can be initially funded by government, thereafter funded by themselves through the same credit union system that operates in communities at the present time. Where people contribute and can draw money out because they've contributed. And if we do that with the SMEs, with the bank having SME representation on the board, then you've got an organ which understands where they're coming from, understands why 20,000 can make a difference, or 50,000, or 500,000 can make a difference. So you've got an instrument there that can actually serve that sector to grow. And if only half of the 340,000 created 2 more jobs each, we're a long way to solving our unemployment problem and giving people job opportunities. And it's that kind of thinking that we need when Scotland becomes independent. When I came to write this book, the first thing I did was take myself out of the box of the United Kingdom. Because we're still in that box. We've been in it for a long time, and there's a tendency to think within that box, outside the box entirely. What would I do if we were in a new Scotland and a blank sheet of paper? How would I, if I was in charge, for example, how would I brief the cabinet and the civil service? differently from what we do it at the present time. And by the way, there's nothing I say in that book about education couldn't be done just now, because we've got the power in the Scottish Parliament to do it. But the Scottish Parliament is still in that box. They still think in those reference terms of the UK. You've got to get outside that box and think entirely different. Independence isn't about the Union Jack not flying along with a saltire in the Bank of Scotland's headquarters. Independence is about a paradigm shift in our economy and in our social society as well. Independence is about being very, very different from how we run ourselves at the present time. And if we can take ourselves out of that box and start to think ways and ideas that we haven't thought before, because there was no point in thinking about them. You know, there's no point in saying an SME bank, because actually we don't have the wherewithal in the Scottish Parliament to do it. Independent country, no reason why not. None whatsoever. And there's one or two other things I can explain, that once you come out of the box, you see things entirely differently.
Okay, seeing as you've touched on that, ever since George Osborne made his cack-handed intervention in the currency debate, and some would argue he's probably done the yes vote a favour. You, in the book, however, argue that quite strongly against the currency union.
Yes. If I had been advising Osborne, which I wouldn't, but if I had been, I would have told them to get a question asked in the House of Commons, you know, and that's sort of low key, and simply say we've looked at it and the answer's no. The real mistake he made was coming up to Edinburgh like the Governor General to tell the natives, I've looked at you and you're not getting what you want. You know, 2 fingers in the Scottish eye. That was a PR blunder of the first magnitude. If he'd done a low-key no in the House of Commons, a lot of folk would have examined the argument. But they didn't examine the argument. They said, he's up here to insult us and we're not having it. So it was a PR disaster for him. But I am opposed to a currency union. I am not voting for independence on the 18th. To give part of that independence over our economy back to the Bank of England. A currency union requires a treaty. So, some folk in the Yes campaign have argued with me that we can join it for a couple of months, and we don't like it, we can poo it. That isn't how it works. You become entrenched. The 2 economies become entrenched. And you just need to look at the Eurozone to see how that operates. Portugal, which I know very well, cannot escape from its poverty inside the euro because there's no way out. It's become entrenched. The banking system and everything become entrenched. A currency union between us and England means a treaty between us and England. We are 5 million people, they are 55 million people. We want the Bank of England to be the lender of last resort. And there'll be no good us saying there'll be no crises, because you have to have belt and braces in a treaty. If we want the Bank of England to be the lender of last resort in a disaster financially inside an independent Scotland, the Governor of the Bank of England came up here and, you know, he didn't do a George Osborne. If you read his speech, it's very neutral, but he spelled out the facts. If I am the Governor and this is the bank of last resort, I have to have a say in your policy, on your budget and your fiscal policy. No alternative to that, because I've got to protect myself and by having some degree of control over you. I see no point in that whatsoever. That's a loss of sovereignty for us. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England has 9 members on it. 5 come from within the bank and 4 are appointed by the Westminster government. 6 of them are Oxbridge educated. Only 1 of them has experience outside the southern part of England. All of them are anchored in the City of London. Do we really believe that sending down 1 person from Edinburgh, because that's all we'd be entitled to, will make any difference to their decisions? They make their decisions in relation to the southeast of England. They don't give a damn about the northeast of England and the northwest of England or us. So one won't make any difference. We will go down there and govern, and they'll still make the same policies that will be detrimental to our economic development. I see no logic in it whatsoever. And by the way, I've got John Swinney on the record, more or less saying the same thing as I'm saying about the Monetary Policy Committee some time ago. When Eddie George was the governor, John complained bitterly about the MPC, and Eddie George more or less said, well, get stuffed. We are not in the business of looking after regions. And that's how they would see an independent Scotland in that currency union. The alternative is our own currency. And in the early transition period, in order to maintain stability, the Scottish pound would equal the English pound. So there's no transaction costs. There is no problem either in anybody, the English using a Scottish currency or us using sterling. No problem whatsoever. The dollar, for example, is used all over the world, but folk aren't in a currency union with the United States of America. Where is the problem for us? The Scottish pound's value would be based upon two things. How much foreign currency reserves we had in our monetary authority up here, our central bank, if you like to put it that way, and the oil factor. These are two things that would matter to the outside person's evaluation of trust in the Scottish currency. Well, the oil factor's there. In trade terms, Scotland would have an enormous trade surplus, because the oil would be ours, and the trade in oil would redound to our trade benefit. And when you export more than you import, you bring in foreign currency reserves. So our central bank would have yen, euros, sterling, dollars, and foreign currency earned by this trade balance underpinned by oil. So there'll be no problem of anyone having faith internationally in a Scottish currency. And if it's one for one in those transitional period, there's no problem. The important thing is this: the decision to align it one for one is a Scottish sovereign decision. Nobody can make us do it. We would do it because it was in our interest. Sovereign decision. And the day we decided not to align would be a sovereign decision as well. Whereas in a currency union, you don't pool sovereignty, you transfer it. And I'm not voting on the 18th September to see the sovereignty I've just voted for transferred back to the Bank of England. That's my position, and I am not prepared to move on it. And I know some folk in the Yes campaign have said to me, oh, stop going on about this, just back the currency union. Well, I would be a hypocrite if I backed a policy I thought was not in the interest of Scotland, and I ain't going to do it.
Thank you, Jim. Okay.